The blood on Thomas Jarrett's shirt had turned from crimson to rust brown by the time he collapsed against the scrub oak, 3 miles north of Clifton in the Arizona Territory, wondering if this September afternoon in 1878 would be his last. He had ridden hard for 2 days straight after the ambush near the Gila River, and the bullet wound in his side had finally stolen the strength from his legs, sending him tumbling from his horse into the desert dust. Thomas pressed his palm against the wound, feeling the warm wetness seep through his fingers. The pain had gone from sharp to dull, which he knew was not a good sign. His horse, a paint mare named Daisy, stood a few feet away, too exhausted to wander far. The sun beat down mercilessly, and Thomas could feel consciousness slipping away like water through a sieve. He thought about his sister Margaret back in Clifton, probably worrying herself sick. He had promised her he would only be gone 3 days to escort the mail wagon to Silver City. That was before Dutch Henry's gang had decided the mail wagon looked like easy pickings. Thomas and the driver had fought them off, but not before Thomas took a bullet and the driver took one to the heart. The world tilted sideways, and Thomas realized he was falling. The ground rushed up to meet him, and then everything went black. When awareness returned, it came in fragments. Cool water on his lips, soft words in a language he did not understand, gentle hands pressing something against his wound that smelled of earth and plants. Thomas tried to open his eyes, but his eyelids felt heavy as iron. "Rest," a woman's voice said in accented English. "You lose much blood. Must rest." Thomas wanted to ask where he was, who she was, but sleep pulled him down again before he could form the words. Time became fluid, unmeasurable. Sometimes he surfaced to consciousness long enough to feel himself being moved, to taste broth on his tongue, to sense the changing light that meant days were passing. The fever came and went in waves, bringing with it dreams that twisted reality into strange shapes. On what might have been the 3rd day, or perhaps the 4th, Thomas finally managed to open his eyes fully. He found himself lying on a pallet of blankets inside what appeared to be a traditional Apache wickiup, the domed structure made of wooden poles covered with brush and hides. Sunlight filtered through the entrance, casting golden patterns on the ground. A woman knelt beside a small fire, stirring something in a clay pot. She wore a deerskin dress decorated with intricate beadwork, and her long black hair hung in a thick braid down her back. When she turned to check on him, Thomas saw a face of striking beauty with high cheekbones, warm brown eyes, and a mouth that looked accustomed to smiling, though it held a serious expression now. "You wake," she said, setting down her stirring stick. "This is good. Fever broke in the night." Thomas tried to speak, but his throat was dry as old leather. The woman quickly brought him a gourd filled with water, supporting his head as he drank. The water tasted sweet and clean, better than anything he had ever known. "Thank you," he managed when he could speak again. "You saved my life." "Perhaps," she said, returning to her fire. "The spirits decide who lives and dies. I only help where I can." "What's your name?" She looked at him for a long moment, as if deciding whether to answer. "Ayasha Zuni. In your language it means little one, though I am not so little anymore." A hint of amusement touched her eyes. "I am called this because I was small as a child." "Thomas Jarrett," he said. "People call me Thomas." "Thomas," she repeated, testing the name on her tongue. "You are lucky I found you when I did. Another few hours, the coyotes would have found you first." Thomas tried to sit up, but pain lanced through his side, forcing him back down with a gasp. Ayasha moved quickly to his side, pressing him gently but firmly against the blankets. "Do not move. The wound begins to heal, but you tear it open with foolishness." Her tone was stern, like a schoolteacher scolding a wayward student. "You must rest 3 more days, maybe 4, before you can sit without bleeding." I need to get back to Clifton, Thomas protested. My sister will think I'm dead, and the mail company needs to know about the attack. Your sister can wait. The mail company can wait. If you die because you are stubborn, what good are you to anyone? Ayasha returned to her cooking, dismissing his concerns with the practicality of someone who had seen too many people make fatal mistakes in the name of haste. Thomas wanted to argue, but exhaustion was already pulling at him again. His eyes drifted closed despite his best efforts to stay awake. Sleep, Ayasha said softly. I will watch over you. The days that followed settled into a gentle rhythm. Ayasha tended his wound with poultices made from plants Thomas could not name, changing the dressing twice daily with hands that were both gentle and efficient. She fed him broth made from rabbit and herbs, gradually introducing more solid food as his strength returned. They spoke little at first. Ayasha seemed content with silence, and Thomas was too weak to sustain much conversation. But he watched her as she went about her daily tasks, noting the grace with which she moved, the quiet competence she brought to everything she did. On the 5th day, Thomas finally managed to sit up without his wound protesting too badly. Ayasha smiled when she saw him upright, the first genuine smile he had seen from her, and it transformed her face entirely. Good, she said. Tomorrow you can walk a little if you are careful. Where exactly am I? Thomas asked. How far from Clifton? 4 miles to the east, Ayasha replied. I live here alone, away from the reservation. The white man's government does not like this, but I do not like living on their reservation, so we are even in our dislike. Thomas heard the bitterness in her voice and understood it. He had seen enough of how the Apache were treated to know that justice was a word that rarely applied to them. Why do you live alone? Where is your family? Ayasha's expression closed off like a door slamming shut. For a moment, Thomas thought she would not answer, but then she spoke, her voice flat and emotionless. My father died fighting the soldiers at Sibque Creek 3 years ago. My mother died the winter after from the sadness of losing him. My brother went north to join other warriors who still resist. I do not know if he lives or has joined our parents in the spirit world. I'm sorry, Thomas said and meant it. She shrugged, but he could see the pain she tried to hide. The world is full of sorrow. We cannot spend all our time speaking of it, or we would never have breath for anything else. That night, Thomas woke to the sound of singing. The voice was soft and melodious, weaving through the darkness like silver thread through black cloth. He opened his eyes and saw Ayasha sitting by the fire, her face tilted up toward the smoke hole in the wickiup's roof, singing a song in her own language. The melody was unlike anything Thomas had heard before, at once mournful and hopeful, ancient and immediate. It spoke of things he could not name but somehow understood, deep in the marrow of his bones. The song told of mountains and rivers, of eagles and deer, of the eternal dance between earth and sky. He lay still, hardly breathing, afraid that any movement might break the spell. Ayasha sang for what might have been minutes or hours, time losing all meaning in the face of such beauty. When the last note finally faded into silence, Thomas felt as if he had been changed somehow, as if the song had reached inside him and rearranged something essential. Ayasha turned and found him watching her. For a moment neither spoke. That was beautiful, Thomas said quietly. What does it mean? It is a song my mother taught me, Ayasha replied. A song for healing, for calling good spirits to help the sick. But also a song for remembering, for keeping the old ways alive when everything else tries to forget them. Will you teach me the words? She looked surprised. Why would you want to learn? Because, Thomas said, and realized as he spoke that he was telling a truth he had not fully understood until that moment. I think I could listen to you sing that song for the rest of my life and never grow tired of it. Ayasha's eyes widened slightly, and even in the dim firelight, Thomas thought he saw color rise to her cheeks. She looked away, suddenly busy with adjusting the fire that needed no adjusting. "You should sleep," she said. "Healing is hard work." But Thomas noticed that she was smiling. The next morning, Ayasha helped Thomas take his first steps outside the wickiup. The world seemed too bright after days in the dimness, and Thomas had to blink against the September sun. They were in a small canyon, hidden from casual view by rock formations and scrub vegetation. A spring bubbled up from between the rocks, creating a small pool before trickling away down the canyon. "This place is sacred," Ayasha explained as they walked slowly along the water's edge, her hand ready to steady him if he faltered. "My people have come here for generations. The water has power to heal, to cleanse, to renew. That is why I live here, even though it means living alone." Thomas looked around at the red rock walls, the clear water, the desert vegetation that seemed greener here than elsewhere. He could feel something in this place, a peace that went beyond mere quiet. "I can see why you would not want to leave," he said. They walked for perhaps 20 minutes before Thomas's strength gave out. Ayasha helped him back to the wickiup, and he collapsed on his pallet, breathing hard. "Tomorrow you will walk further," she said with confidence. "Each day you grow stronger." She was right. Over the following days, Thomas's strength returned steadily. The wound in his side knitted itself together under Ayasha's care, leaving only a puckered scar. He began to help her with small tasks, fetching water from the spring, gathering firewood, preparing food. They talked more as the days passed, sharing stories of their lives. Thomas told her about growing up in Missouri, about coming west after the war with his younger sister Margaret when their parents died of cholera. He spoke of working as a ranch hand, a freight guard, whatever jobs presented themselves, trying to build a life in this hard country. Ayasha told him about her childhood, about learning the old ways from her mother and grandmother, about the time before the reservations when her people ranged freely across these lands. She spoke with love of her father, a man of great courage and wisdom, and of her brother, who she prayed might still live somewhere to the north. But more than their words, Thomas found himself drawn to Ayasha herself. He loved the way she moved, economical and graceful. He loved her laugh, which she gave sparingly but which lit up the world when it came. He loved her hands, strong and capable, able to dress a wound or prepare food or repair tools with equal skill. And most of all, he loved her voice, especially when she sang. She sang often in the evenings, sometimes the healing song, sometimes other songs she had learned from her mother. Thomas would lie on his pallet and listen, feeling something in his chest grow and expand with each note. 10 days after waking in the wickiup, Thomas knew that he was well enough to leave. The wound had healed cleanly and his strength had returned. He could ride back to Clifton, return to his life, report what had happened to the mail company, but he found himself reluctant to go. That evening, as Ayasha sang by the fire, Thomas made a decision. When the song ended, he spoke before he could lose his courage. "Ayasha, I need to tell you something." She looked at him, firelight dancing in her dark eyes. "What is it?" "I know I should leave tomorrow. I know my sister is probably worried sick, and I have responsibilities in Clifton. But the thought of leaving here, of leaving you, it feels like leaving a part of myself behind." Ayasha was very still, her expression unreadable. "What are you saying, Thomas?" "I am saying that I have fallen in love with you," Thomas said, his heart hammering in his chest. "I know it has only been 10 days. I know there are 100 reasons why this is complicated and difficult. But when you sang me to sleep that first night, when I woke and heard your voice, I knew somehow that I wanted to hear that song forever. I want to hear all your songs for the rest of my life." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. Thomas watched Ayasha's face, trying to read her thoughts, but she kept them hidden. Finally, she spoke. "You know what this would mean, to love an Apache woman in this time and place. Your own people would turn against you. They would call you names, treat you as if you had betrayed them. Life would not be easy." "I know," Thomas said. "I have thought about it. But I have also thought about what my life would be like without you in it, and that seems harder to bear than any hardship we might face together." Ayasha stood and walked to the entrance of the wickiup, looking out at the star-filled sky. Thomas waited, hardly breathing. "When I found you in the desert," she said quietly, "I almost rode past. I thought, this is a white man, one of those who have brought so much suffering to my people. Why should I help him? But then I heard a voice inside me, a voice that might have been my mother's or might have been the spirit's, saying that this man was important, that saving him mattered. So I brought you here and I healed you, and each day I found myself drawn to you more." She turned to face him. "You are kind, Thomas Jarrett. You listen when I speak. You respect the old ways even though they are not your ways. You see me, not as a savage or a conquered people, but as a woman, as a person. This is rare." Thomas stood, crossing the small space between them. "Ayasha, I am not finished," she said, but she was smiling. "I too have thought about what it would mean to love you. I have thought about the difficulties we would face. But I have also thought about the sound of your voice, the kindness in your eyes, the way you make me feel like I am not alone in this world anymore. And I have decided that you are worth the risk." Thomas felt joy surge through him like lightning. "You mean?" "I mean that I love you too," Ayasha said. "I love you, and I want to try to build a life together, whatever that may look like." Thomas reached out and took her hands, marveling at the rightness of it, the way her fingers intertwined with his as if they had been made to fit together. "I will go to Clifton tomorrow," he said. "I will explain everything to Margaret, to the mail company, and then I will come back if you will have me. I will bring supplies, tools, whatever we need. We can build a life here in this sacred place. Or," Ayasha said softly, "we could build a life somewhere else, somewhere new. I love this place, but I love it for the peace it has given me. If I have peace with you, we can make any place sacred." They stood together in the entrance to the wickiup, hands clasped, looking out at the desert night. In the distance, a coyote called and another answered. The stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance. Thomas thought about kissing her then, but something held him back. This felt too important to rush, too precious to treat with anything less than complete reverence. "Will you sing for me?" he asked instead. "The healing song." Ayasha smiled and began to sing, her voice rising into the night. Thomas listened and felt his heart heal in ways he had not known it was broken. The next morning, Thomas prepared to ride to Clifton. Ayasha had found his horse, Daisy, days ago and had been caring for her, so the mare was well rested and ready for the journey. Thomas checked his saddle and gear, moving slowly to avoid stressing his healing wound. "I will be back before sunset tomorrow," he told Ayasha. 2 days at most. I need to speak with Margaret, settle my affairs with the mail company, and gather some supplies." Ayasha nodded. She had packed food for his journey, wrapping jerky and journey bread in cloth. "Be careful, Dutch Henry's gang may still be in the area." "I will," Thomas promised. He wanted to kiss her goodbye but settled for squeezing her hand. "Will you be all right here alone?" "I have been alone for 3 years," Ayasha reminded him with a slight smile. "I think I can manage 2 more days." The ride to Clifton took most of the day. Thomas pushed Daisy as hard as he dared, eager to complete his business and return to the canyon. The town appeared in the distance as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, its scattered buildings looking small and fragile against the vast desert landscape. Clifton sat along the San Francisco River in a valley between steep cliffs. A rough mining town that had sprung up after copper deposits were discovered a few years earlier. The main street was lined with saloons, general stores, a blacksmith, and a scattering of other businesses that catered to the miners and ranchers of the area. Thomas rode directly to the small adobe house he shared with Margaret on the eastern edge of town. Before he could dismount, the door flew open and his sister ran out, her face a mixture of relief and fury. "Thomas Jarrett, I could kill you myself," Margaret cried, but she was hugging him before the words were fully out of her mouth. "I thought you were dead." "It has been almost 2 weeks with no word." "I am sorry, Margaret," Thomas said, holding his sister tight. "I was shot during an ambush. If not for a woman who found me and healed me, I would be dead." Margaret pulled back, her blue eyes searching his face. "Shot? Are you all right?" "Should I fetch the doctor?" "I am fine now, truly." Thomas dismounted and tied Daisy to the hitching post. "But I need to talk to you about something important. Can we go inside?" Over coffee in their small kitchen, Thomas told Margaret everything. He described the ambush, waking in the wickiup, Ayasha's care, and finally, his feelings for the Apache woman who had saved his life. He watched his sister's face carefully as he spoke, trying to gauge her reaction. Margaret was 20 years old, 4 years younger than Thomas, with the same dark blonde hair and blue eyes he had inherited from their father. She had always been practical and level-headed, qualities that had helped them survive the hard years after their parents' deaths. When Thomas finished speaking, Margaret was quiet for a long moment, her coffee cup cradled between her hands. "You love her," she finally said. It was not a question. "I do," Thomas confirmed. "I know it is complicated. I know people will talk, maybe worse than talk. But Margaret, when I was lying in that desert dying, she did not have to help me. She chose to, and she asked nothing in return. She is good and kind and strong, and I cannot imagine my life without her now." Margaret reached across the table and took his hand. "Then you should be with her." "I have never seen you look the way you look when you talk about her, Thomas. You are happy, truly happy, maybe for the first time since Ma and Pa died." Relief flooded through Thomas. "You do not mind. I am your sister, not your keeper. Of course, I worry about the difficulties you will face. People in this town can be narrow-minded and cruel, but I also know that life is too short and too hard to turn away from love when you find it." Margaret squeezed his hand. "What are you planning to do?" "I am not entirely sure yet," Thomas admitted. "Ayasha and I talked about building a life together, but we did not discuss the details. I need to resign from the mail company, gather supplies, and figure out how we can make this work." "Where will you live?" "Ayasha has a place in a canyon about 4 miles from here. It is hidden, peaceful. For now, we could stay there, but eventually we might need to find somewhere more permanent, especially if—" Thomas trailed off, suddenly embarrassed. Margaret smiled knowingly. "Especially if you start a family." "Have you thought about that? About what it would mean to have children who are half Apache in this territory?" "I have thought about it," Thomas said. "It will not be easy for them. But I would rather raise children with Ayasha, teaching them to be strong and proud of both their heritages, than live a safe, empty life without her." "Then you have my blessing," Margaret said, "though I hope you will visit sometimes. I would like to meet this remarkable woman who has captured my brother's heart." They talked late into the night, making plans and discussing practicalities. Margaret insisted that Thomas take his share of their savings, money they had been putting aside toward buying a small ranch someday. "Use it to build something with Ayasha," Margaret said. "You can pay me back when you are on your feet." The next morning, Thomas went to the freight company office and resigned his position, explaining that he had been wounded in the ambush and that the driver, a man named Samuel Cooper, had been killed. The company manager, a portly man named Henderson, was sympathetic but practical. "You are a good worker, Jarrett, and I am sorry to lose you. But I understand wanting to step back after nearly getting killed. If you change your mind, there will always be work here for you." Thomas thanked him and collected his final wages. He spent the rest of the morning purchasing supplies at the general store, including tools, food staples, blankets, and other necessities. The store owner, an older man named Buchanan, made small talk as he tallied up the purchases. "Building something, are you?" Buchanan asked. "Something like that," Thomas replied vaguely. By early afternoon, Thomas had everything loaded on Daisy and a pack mule he had purchased. He said goodbye to Margaret, promising to return in a few weeks to let her know how things were going. "Be happy, Thomas," Margaret said, hugging him tight. "That is all I want for you." The ride back to the canyon seemed longer than the ride out, perhaps because Thomas was so eager to return. The sun was setting when he finally reached the familiar rock formations that marked the entrance to Ayasha's home. She was waiting outside the wickiup, and the smile that lit her face when she saw him made every mile worth it. "You came back," she said as he dismounted. "Did you doubt I would?" Thomas asked, taking her hands in his. "No," Ayasha admitted. "But it is still good to see you, to know that your people did not talk you out of this." "My sister sends her regards," Thomas said. "She wants to meet you when you are ready." Ayasha looked surprised. "Your sister approves. She wants me to be happy, and you make me happy." They unloaded the supplies together as darkness fell, working in comfortable companionship. When everything was stored away, they sat by the fire, and Thomas told Ayasha about everything that had happened in Clifton. "I have money saved," he explained. "Enough to buy land if we can find a place where we would be accepted, or enough to build on to your wickiup to make it more permanent if you want to stay here." Ayasha was quiet, staring into the fire. "I have been thinking while you were gone," she finally said, "about what kind of life we can have together. The truth is, Thomas, that I do not know if there is anywhere in this territory where we will be fully accepted. Your people will judge you for loving an Apache. My people, those who remain, will judge me for loving a white man. We will always be caught between two worlds." Thomas's heart sank. "Are you saying you have changed your mind?" "No," Ayasha said quickly, turning to look at him. "I am saying that if we are going to be outsiders anyway, we should at least be outsiders together in a place we choose. I am saying that I do not need to stay in this canyon. It has been my refuge, but with you, I do not need refuge anymore. I need a home, a real home that we build together." Hope rekindled in Thomas's chest. "What are you suggesting?" "There are places to the north, in New Mexico territory, where the settlements are newer and people are too busy surviving to worry much about who loves whom. We could find land there, start fresh where no one knows us. We could raise horses or cattle, grow what we need, build a life on our own terms." Thomas considered this. It would mean leaving Margaret, leaving the familiar, striking out into the unknown. But as he looked at Ayasha's face, saw the hope and determination in her eyes, he knew it was the right choice. "Then that is what we will do," he said. "We will go north, find land, build something that is ours." Ayasha smiled, and this time when Thomas leaned in to kiss her, she met him halfway. Their lips touched softly at first, then with growing passion. It was their first kiss, and it tasted of smoke and sweetness and promise. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Ayasha rested her forehead against Thomas's, her hands on his chest. "I have never kissed anyone before," she admitted quietly. "Neither have I," Thomas confessed, "but I would very much like to do it again." Ayasha laughed, a sound of pure joy, and pulled him close for another kiss. They spent the next week preparing for their journey north. Thomas rode to Clifton twice more, once to purchase horses and a wagon and once to say a final goodbye to Margaret. His sister cried when he told her he was leaving, but she hugged him tight and wished him well. "Write to me when you can," Margaret said. "Let me know where you settle. I will come visit when I am able." "I will," Thomas promised. "Take care of yourself, Margaret. You are the best sister a man could ask for." Meanwhile, Ayasha packed what belongings she wanted to take and performed a ceremony at the sacred spring, thanking the spirits for the healing and shelter the canyon had provided. Thomas watched respectfully as she sang and scattered cornmeal on the water, moved by the reverence she showed for the old ways. On a cool October morning, they loaded the wagon with their supplies and left the canyon behind. Ayasha sat beside Thomas on the wagon seat, looking back only once at the place that had been her home. "No regrets?" Thomas asked. "None," Ayasha said firmly. "My home is with you now, wherever be that may be." They traveled north, avoiding the main roads where possible. In the small towns where they stopped for supplies, they introduced themselves as husband and wife, though they had not yet formalized their union. Most people accepted this at face value, though Thomas noticed the occasional suspicious glance or whispered comment. At night, they camped under the stars. Thomas would build the fire while Ayasha prepared their meal, and afterward she would sing while he listened, never tiring of the songs she knew. Sometimes they talked late into the night about their plans, their hopes, their dreams. Other times they sat in comfortable silence, content just to be near each other. They crossed into New Mexico territory 3 weeks after leaving the canyon. The landscape changed gradually, the desert giving way to grasslands and rolling hills. They passed through small settlements, asking about land for sale and the temperament of the locals. In a town called Silver Creek, they met a rancher named William Patterson, who was selling a portion of his land. Patterson was an older man, weathered by decades of hard living, but his eyes were kind. "You two looking to settle around here?" he asked after Thomas inquired about the land. "We are," Thomas said carefully, "if folks around here would not mind." Patterson looked from Thomas to Ayasha, taking in their clasped hands the way they stood close together. "I will tell you straight," he said. "Some folks will mind. There are narrow-minded people everywhere. But there are also good people here, people who believe in letting others live their lives in peace. I count myself among the latter." He showed them the land, 200 acres of good grassland with a stream running through it and timber enough for building. The price was fair, and Thomas had enough money saved to make a down payment with the promise of paying the rest over the next 2 years. They shook hands on the deal, and Patterson threw in some lumber and tools to help them get started. "My wife Sarah would like to meet you both," Patterson said as they concluded their business. "Come to dinner tomorrow night if you are willing. She does not get much chance for socializing out here, and she would enjoy the company." Thomas looked at Ayasha, who nodded. "We would be honored," Thomas said. Dinner with the Pattersons turned out to be a warm, welcoming affair. Sarah Patterson was a plump, cheerful woman who treated Ayasha with genuine kindness, asking about her life and traditions with sincere interest rather than morbid curiosity. By the end of the evening, the two women were talking like old friends, and Sarah had invited Ayasha to visit any time she liked. "You have found good land and good neighbors," Sarah told them as they prepared to leave. "I hope you will be very happy here." Over the following months, Thomas and Ayasha built their home. Using the lumber Patterson had provided and timber they cut themselves, they constructed a small but sturdy cabin. Thomas did most of the heavy construction work, but Ayasha proved to be a skilled helper, and she insisted on building a traditional ramada beside the cabin, a shade structure where she could work during the hot parts of the day. The work was hard, but they approached it together with determination and growing love. Each evening, exhausted from the day's labor, they would sit outside their unfinished cabin and watch the sunset. Ayasha would sing, and Thomas would listen, feeling a contentment he had never known before. As winter approached, the cabin was finished enough to be habitable. They purchased cattle and chickens from Patterson, beginning to build their herd and establish their homestead. True to his word, Thomas wrote to Margaret regularly, describing their new life in detail. Margaret wrote back with news from Clifton and encouragement for their endeavors. In one letter, she mentioned that she had begun stepping out with a young clerk at the general store, a development that made Thomas smile. On a cold December night, as snow fell softly outside their cabin, Thomas and Ayasha lay together in the bed they had built, wrapped in warm blankets. They had been sharing this bed for weeks now, their relationship having grown into full intimacy, but tonight felt different somehow. "Thomas," Ayasha said softly, "I have something to tell you." He turned to face her in the darkness. "What is it?" "I am carrying your child," she said. "I am sure of it now." Joy and terror flooded through Thomas in equal measure. "Are you certain?" "I am certain," Ayasha confirmed. "The child will come in summer, I think." Thomas pulled her close, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "We should marry properly," he said. "I want this child to have married parents, to have every advantage we can give." "We are married in all the ways that matter," Ayasha said. "But if you want to marry in the white man's way as well, I am willing." They traveled to Silver Creek a week later and were married by the local judge in a brief civil ceremony. Sarah Patterson insisted on organizing a small celebration afterward, inviting several neighboring families who had proven themselves friendly. Not everyone in Silver Creek was welcoming. There were those who muttered about the union, who made their disapproval clear through cold looks and cutting remarks. But there were also people like the Pattersons, who judged Thomas and Ayasha by their character rather than their backgrounds. As Ayasha's pregnancy progressed, Sarah became a regular visitor, bringing gifts for the baby and offering advice based on raising her own 4 children. The friendship between the two women deepened, and Thomas was grateful that Ayasha had found a female friend in this new place. In late June of 1879, Ayasha went into labor. Sarah came to help, along with a midwife from Silver Creek, while Thomas paced anxiously outside the cabin. The labor was long and difficult, and Thomas thought he might wear a groove in the dirt from his worried pacing. Finally, as the sun was setting, he heard the thin, angry cry of a newborn. Sarah emerged from the cabin, smiling broadly. "You have a son," she announced. "A healthy, strong son, and Ayasha is doing well." Thomas rushed inside to find Ayasha propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in soft cloth. She smiled when she saw him and held out the baby. "Meet your son," she said. Thomas took the infant carefully, marveling at the tiny perfect features, the shock of dark hair, the small hands that grasped reflexively at the air. Love struck him like a physical blow, fierce and overwhelming. "He is beautiful," Thomas whispered. "Perfect. What should we call him?" Ayasha asked. They had discussed names during the pregnancy but had not settled on anything definite. Now, looking at his son's face, Thomas knew what felt right. "James," he said. "After my father, James Jarrett." Ayasha smiled. "James? Yes, that is a good name, strong." As the months passed, their little family settled into a rhythm. James was a healthy, happy baby who grew quickly. Thomas worked the ranch while Ayasha cared for the baby and managed the household. It was hard work, but they were building something together, creating a life that belonged to them alone. Margaret came to visit when James was 6 months old, making the long journey from Clifton with her new husband, the store clerk she had mentioned in her letters. His name was David Morrison, and he seemed like a good man who treated Margaret with kindness and respect. The visit was joyful, though bittersweet. Thomas had not realized how much he missed his sister until she was there in front of him. Margaret doted on James, and she and Ayasha became fast friends, bonding over the shared experience of being women in this hard country. "You look happy, Thomas," Margaret said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Truly happy." "I am," Thomas said simply. "Ayasha and James, this place, this life we are building together, it is more than I ever hoped for." "I am glad," Margaret said, squeezing his hand. "You deserve happiness." The years flowed by, marked by the changing seasons and the milestones of their growing family. When James was 2, Ayasha gave birth to a daughter they named Emma, a beautiful child with her mother's dark eyes and her father's smile. 2 years after Emma came another son, William, and 3 years after that, another daughter, Grace. The ranch prospered. Thomas proved to be a skilled rancher, and Ayasha's knowledge of the land and its plants helped them through drought years and hard winters. They hired help when they could afford it, usually drifters passing through who needed work and were willing to labor for fair wages without asking questions about the mixed-race family they worked for. The children grew up strong and healthy, learning from both their parents. Thomas taught them ranching skills, reading, arithmetic, and the value of hard work. Ayasha taught them the Apache language, the old songs and stories, respect for the land and all living things. She taught them to be proud of both their heritages, to hold their heads high even when faced with prejudice. And there was prejudice. As the children grew older and began venturing into Silver Creek for supplies or church services, they sometimes faced cruel words from other children, cold looks from adults who disapproved of their mixed heritage. It hurt Thomas to see his children wounded this way, but Ayasha helped him understand that they could not protect them from everything. "We can only teach them to be strong," she said, "to know who they are and to be proud of it. The world will judge them harshly sometimes, but if they are secure in themselves, the judgment of others will not break them." James, as the eldest, felt the sting of prejudice most keenly. He was 13 when he came home one day with a black eye and bloodied knuckles, having fought 3 boys who called his mother a savage. Thomas wanted to be angry, but he saw the look on James's face and instead felt only pride. "Did you win?" Thomas asked. "No, sir," James admitted. "But I made them sorry they started it." Ayasha tended to James's injuries while Thomas talked to him about choosing his battles wisely and not letting anger rule his actions. But privately, Thomas was glad his son had the courage to stand up for his family. Emma and William and Grace faced their own challenges as they grew, but they also found friends among the more open-minded families in Silver Creek. The Patterson children, now mostly grown themselves, were particularly kind, having been raised by parents who valued character over bloodlines. Through it all, Ayasha and Thomas's love deepened and matured. They had been married for nearly 15 years now, and Thomas still felt his heart lift when Ayasha smiled at him. He still loved to hear her sing. Though her songs now were often lullabies for the children or work songs, she hummed while cooking and cleaning. On their 15th anniversary, Thomas arranged for Sarah Patterson to watch the children so he could take Ayasha on a picnic to a beautiful spot by the stream that ran through their property. It was early summer, the land green and alive with wildflowers. They sat on a blanket under a cottonwood tree, eating the simple meal Thomas had prepared and watching the water flow past. Ayasha leaned against him, and Thomas wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Leaving the canyon, leaving your old life, building this life with me?" Ayasha looked up at him with surprise. "Never. Why would you ask such a thing?" "I know it has not always been easy," Thomas said. "The prejudice our children face, the struggle to make the ranch work, being caught between two worlds. I just want to know that you are happy." Ayasha took his face in her hands, looking into his eyes with an intensity that still had the power to steal his breath. "Thomas Jarrett, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. Yes, life has been hard sometimes, but I have you, and I have our children, and I have a home that is truly mine in a way the canyon never was. I am happy, more happy than I ever thought possible when I was alone in that wickiup, believing I would spend the rest of my life in solitude." She kissed him then, a long, deep kiss that tasted of 15 years of partnership, struggle, joy, and love. "Do you remember," Thomas said when they finally broke apart, "the first night I heard you sing? I was barely conscious, but I knew even then that I wanted to hear that song forever." "I remember," Ayasha said. "You told me that you loved my voice before you told me that you loved me." "I loved both," Thomas said. "I still do. Will you sing for me now? The healing song." Ayasha smiled and began to sing, her voice rising into the summer air. Thomas listened, feeling the same sense of peace and rightness he had felt that first night in the wickiup when he was more dead than alive. The song ended, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the stream flow past. Thomas thought about the journey that had brought them here, from that moment of near death in the desert to this moment of perfect contentment beside the woman he loved. It had not been an easy road, but it had been worth every hardship. "I love you," he said quietly. "I love you too," Ayasha replied. "Forever." The children grew to adulthood, each finding their own path in the world. James became a skilled rancher and eventually took over the majority of the ranch work from his aging father. He married a young woman named Catherine who he met in Silver Creek, and they built a house on the western edge of the property and began raising children of their own. Emma married a schoolteacher who came to Silver Creek from back east, a man who loved her for her sharp mind and kind heart, and cared nothing for the narrow-minded prejudices of others. They moved to Santa Fe, where Emma helped her husband run a school for children of all backgrounds. William chose a different path, joining the cavalry and serving with distinction on the frontier. He wrote letters home regularly, and Thomas felt a complicated mixture of pride and worry, knowing his son wore the same uniform as the soldiers who had killed Ayasha's father. But Ayasha did not seem troubled by it. "William is his own man," she said when Thomas expressed his concerns. "He serves with honor, trying to keep the peace. My father would understand that sometimes children must find their own way, even if it leads them down unexpected roads." Grace, the youngest, had her mother's gift for healing. She learned everything Ayasha could teach her about traditional medicine, but she also studied with the doctor in Silver Creek, combining the knowledge of two traditions. She never married, instead dedicating her life to healing the sick and injured throughout the territory. As Thomas and Ayasha grew older, they gradually stepped back from the day-to-day work of running the ranch, leaving it in James's capable hands. They spent their days in quieter pursuits, tending a garden, visiting with their growing brood of grandchildren, and simply enjoying each other's company. Thomas's hair turned from dark blonde to silver, and his hands grew gnarled with arthritis. Ayasha's face gained lines and her hair threads of white, but to Thomas, she was as beautiful as the day he first saw her kneeling by the fire in the wickiup. On warm evenings, they would sit on the porch of the cabin they had built together all those years ago, watching the sun set over their land. And Ayasha would sing, her voice perhaps not as strong as it once was but no less beautiful, the old songs that connected her to her ancestors and her traditions. Thomas would listen, his hand clasped in hers, feeling the same surge of love and gratitude he had felt that first night. He had wanted to hear her song forever, and that wish had been granted in ways he could never have imagined. They had built a life together against all odds, a life filled with love and struggle and joy. They had raised children who were strong and proud, who carried both their heritages forward into an uncertain future. They had created something lasting and good in a world that had tried to tell them their love was impossible. On a spring evening in 1908, 30 years after Thomas had collapsed in the desert and Ayasha had found him, they sat on their porch as the last light faded from the sky. Thomas was 74 now, Ayasha 71, and they could feel the weight of their years in their bones. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been?" Thomas asked. "If you had ridden past me that day in the desert." "Sometimes," Ayasha admitted, "but not with regret. Everything that happened brought us here to this moment. How could I regret any of it?" She began to sing, the healing song she had sung over him that first night when he lay wounded and fevered. Her voice was reedy with age now, but it still carried the power of those ancient words, still spoke of mountains and rivers and the eternal dance of earth and sky. Thomas listened, his eyes closed, transported back to that moment when his life had changed forever. He had been dying and she had saved him. But more than that, she had given him a reason to live, a purpose beyond mere survival. She had given him love, family, a home, a future. The song ended, and Thomas opened his eyes to find Ayasha smiling at him. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "I am thinking," Thomas said, "that I am the luckiest man who ever lived. I got to hear that song forever just like I wanted. And I got to love you forever, which is more than I ever deserved." "We deserved each other," Ayasha said firmly. "The spirits brought us together for a reason. We were meant to love, to build, to create something beautiful in a world that often forgets about beauty." They sat together as darkness fell, hands clasped. Two souls who had found each other against all odds and had chosen to build a life together no matter the cost. Around them, the ranch they had built hummed with the quiet sounds of evening, cattle lowing in the distance, crickets beginning their nightly chorus, the soft murmur of voices from James and Catherine's house, where their grandchildren were being put to bed. Inside their cabin, the walls were decorated with photographs of their children and grandchildren, testament to the family they had created. On a shelf sat mementos of their long life together. A piece of the clay pot Ayasha had been stirring that first day Thomas woke in the wickiup, a horseshoe from Daisy the paint mare who had carried Thomas to safety, dried flowers from their wedding day, letters from their scattered children. These were the artifacts of a life well lived, a love well cherished. And as the stars began to appear overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss all those years ago, Thomas Jarrett and Ayasha Zuni Jarrett sat together in perfect contentment, knowing that they had found what so many search for but never find: true love, lasting partnership, and a home built on the foundation of mutual respect and devotion. Their story had begun with a song in the darkness, a voice calling a dying man back to life. It had continued through years of joy and struggle, through the raising of children and the building of a life. And it would end, as all stories must, but not today. Not while they still had each other, and the sunset, and the songs that connected them to everything that had come before and everything that would come after. Ayasha began to sing again, a different song this time, one about the enduring nature of love, about how some bonds are strong enough to transcend the boundaries of this world and reach into the next. Thomas listened and smiled and held her hand, and knew that whatever came next, they would face it together, just as they had faced everything else. Together, always together, until the very end and beyond.